upon woe. Not enough room for it all, and yet there is room. It makes rooms. Rooms upon hundreds of rooms full of indistinguishable remains. Pelafina Heather Livre, Johnny's mother, in a letter to Johnny from her mental hospital. Hi, this is Carla, and welcome back to There Might Be Cupcakes, and welcome back to the labyrinth of the Navidson record and the expanding house at Ash Tree Lane in Virginia. This is the 4th episode in my ongoing deep dive series on Mark Z. Danielewski's horror novel House of Leaves. If you've not listened to them, the episodes in order are as follows. 68, Bone Chimes and Primitive Spiders. 70, Ergodic. 73, Tangerines to Apples. I'll link to their Podchaser links in the show notes. When last we left the family, Karen, the mother, was screaming in a closet that had inexplicably grown larger. We returned to the family to an uneasy emotional silence and dance around the problems at hand and ruler. Navidson continues to record everything as planned, but the domestic togetherness that was a goal for him giving up his photography career and joining Karen in nesting bliss, it has turned into this dance of distance. Navidson is studiously filming his growing house, and Karen is cold to him and at arm's length with the children. The title of this episode comes from both Johnny's footnotes to the Navidson record and Pelafina's letters. Both Johnny and his mother independently used something akin to this phrase. Johnny in his expansive footnotes to the Navidson record, and Pelafina to her letters to her son from the mental hospital. We'll explore that shortly. Interestingly, Johnny wrote no footnotes on his mother's letters. None. Not even to define her expansive and showy Greek mythology references, Latin phrases, use of Spanish, French, and even Old English. Shout out to the House of Leaves subreddit for helping me with the Old English translations. Again, more on that later. I am again getting ahead of myself. House of Leaves is circular, so I rather can't help myself. Everything's connected. Johnny most likely did not annotate Pelafina's letters because of their intensely emotional and psychological content. Again, I assume. Too close to the bone, to paraphrase Emily Dickinson. Pelafina, as we shall see, was so singularly focused upon Johnny. He was her only source of happiness. He was her emotional barometer. She struggled to maintain her sense of self outside of her son. I can't imagine Johnny, in his supernatural and emotional struggles with the Navidson record papers, being able to footnote his mother's letters without coming apart himself. We shall see why as we venture into Pelafina's personal labyrinth at its proper time. If you're closely following along, this is section 5. The opening quote is from R.K. Narayan. Raju welcomed the intrusion. Something to relieve the loneliness of the place. Yes, the house on Ash Tree Lane is incredibly lonely, and probably frightening right now, and fear of the unknown can be truly lonely, and a deep intrusion is coming. Narayan was an East Indian author, one of the earliest writers of Indian literature in English, who mentored Graham Greene, one of the foremost writers of relationships and domestic dramas. He's the author of the famous novel The End of the Affair, amongst others. So Karen screams. Then an emotional silence. On Navidson's tape over the next month, we see his friend, the engineer Billy Reston, return several times from UVA to keep measuring the house, calling the house's changing shape and growing a goddamn spatial rape, a theme that will return in Pelafina's letters. Navidson's brother Tom has to return home in June. Billy gives him a ride to Charlottesville so he can get to Dulles Airport. Saying goodbye to Tom is fraught and complicated. For the first time in the novel, titles to the songs in Poe's companion album Haunted show up in the novel, emboldened in the text, one directly and one obliquely. The first is the 5.5-minute hallway, track 8 on the record, on page 60, and Exploration B, which of course is referred to as Exploration A, I'm saying it counts, bear with me, on page 63, track 1 on the album. I first talked about Exploration A in the first episode, Bone Chimes and Primitive Spiders, but I will again here because it fits into what we are directed to read in the footnotes by the editor of the written Navidson record. The song Exploration B, track 1, starts with a ringing phone and continues, I thought you should know, Daddy died today. He closed his eyes and he left here at 12:03. He sends his love. He wants you to know he isn't holding a grudge. And if you are, you should let go. Pick up. Pick up, please. Mom? Hello? It fits in this episode because we will come to the death of Johnny's father and, well, to his mother in a really big way. And a grudge fits in. You'll understand the grudge once we delve into his mother's letters. And then there's 5.5-minute hallway, track 8 on the Haunted album. Quote, I live at the end of a 5.5-minute hallway, but as far as I can see, you are still miles from me, in your doorway. And oh, by the way, when the landlord came today, he measured everything. I knew he'd get it wrong, but I just played along, because I was hoping he'd fix it all. But there's only so far I can go. When you're living in a hallway that keeps growing, I think to myself, 5 more minutes and I'll be there, inside your door. But there's more to this story than I've been letting on. There are words made of letters, unwritten. And yes, I forgive you for leading me on. You can think of it like this. When you can't resist, I'm in your hallway standing on a cliff. And just when I think I've found the trick, I'm tumbling like an echo. Because there's only so far I can go. When you're living in a hallway that keeps growing, I think to myself, 30 seconds and I'll be there. I think it bears repeating here, since it can get confusing, that the phrase, the Navidson record, refers to the compiled videotapes shot by Will Navidson in his home. Also, the 2 videotapes of the 2 explorations, A and B, that were passed around by people and then became the urban legend of the house. And this written compilation by first the Pano, now Johnny Truant, that have been also passed around. As I said, the house is circular, perhaps spiral, rather even widening circles unto itself, always returning home. Which brings us to the theme of echoes in this section. Imagine an echo down that well of a spiral of ideas of a house. Quote, it is impossible to appreciate the importance of space in the Navidson record without first taking into account the significance of echoes. Which, of course, in House of Leaves leads us to literature and myth. There are 2 versions of the myth of Echo. In the first, Echo, who's a mountain nymph, helps the god Zeus, aka Jupiter, make a sexual conquest by distracting his wife Hera, aka Juno, with long-winded conversation. Basically, Jupiter can get it on while Echo's going blah, 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 blah with his wife. Hera, aka Juno, punishes Echo by fixing her voice so that she can only repeat the last word that was spoken to her. Then Echo falls in love with Narcissus, whose self-obsession causes Echo to lose herself until only her voice is left. Interestingly, the woman who can only speak others' words, who can only reflect others, falls in love with the man who only loves himself, who falls in love with his own reflection. This version is told in Ovid's Metamorphoses. In the second version of the Echo myth, the sexual god Pan falls for Echo. She rejects him, and in response, he and the men who work in the fields, who Pan has worked up into a frenzy, tear her apart, quote, burying all of her except her voice, Adanta Tamila, her still singing limbs. This version is told in the 2nd century Daphnis and Chloe by the Greek poet Longus. Here in the text of the book, instead of saying he tore her to pieces, it says he tore her to Pisces. Put a pin in this. It shows up again in a most interesting place. As I said, there's no accidents in this book. I noticed that in the first myth, it's that of a father figure, that of Zeus or Jupiter, and the second is that of a sexual conquest figure / stalker. Both interestingly revolve around sexual jealousy, which will show up again. Since Ovid turns Echo into shadows and forest, his verse is applicable to this House of Leaves. Quote, so she was turned away to hide her face, her lips, her guilt among the trees, even the leaves, to haunt caves of the forest, to feed her love on melancholy sorrow, which sleepless turned her body to a shade, first pale and wrinkled, then a sheet of air, then bones, which some say turned to thin worn rocks, and last her voice remained, vanished in forest, far from her usual walks on hills and valleys. She's heard by all who call, her voice has life. Before we continue to listen for echoes, something else is inserted. It seems odd, but everything was done with purpose in this novel, so I will pay purchase to it. Johnny quibbles about a Don Quixote quote in Zappano's notes. Zappano compared two identical quotes and claims a nuanced change in one of the translations, and Johnny points out how both of them are exactly the same. Thanks to my Duolingo Spanish lessons, I was able to translate it. Thank you, you cute green owl. Quote, "The truth whose mother is history, emulator of time, repository of actions, witness of the past, example and warning of the present, warning of what is to come." This is another harbinger of reading Johnny's mother's words, plus an upcoming conversation between someone else and Johnny's mother about truth. Again, we'll put a pin in this. Something is coming, which is a major theme to this novel. Something big is looming and coming. I find it interesting that the novel in question is Don Quixote, the source of the word quixotic, which means striving for visionary ideals, and the source of the phrase tilting at windmills, which means to attack imaginary enemies or to fruitless quest. Is the house an imaginary enemy? Or is the Navidson Record's power over someone's psyche? Or Pelafina's hold over Johnny? Or is exploring the 5.5-minute hallway a fruitless quest? More about echoes. Quote from Zappano. "It is impossible to appreciate the importance of space in the Navidson Record without first taking into account the significance of echoes. Think how much space is required for an echo. Zappano explains this. It's massive. Quote, "At 68 degrees Fahrenheit, sound travels at approximately 1,130 feet per second. A reflective surface must stand at least 56.5 feet away in order for a person to detect the doubling of her voice." In other words, to hear an echo regardless of whether eyes are opened or closed is to have already seen a sizable space. Myth makes echo the subject of longing and desire. Physics makes echo the subjects of distance and design. Where emotion and reason are concerned, both claims are accurate. And where there is no echo, there is no description of space or love. There is only silence." Unquote. Please keep this quote in mind when we talk about Johnny's mother. Distance, love, and echoing of words. Echoes are emotional as well as literal, and distance is required. Interestingly, graphomania is brought up in a footnote on page 43. Backtracking a little. I discussed hypergraphia in episode 70, ergodic. Graphomania is a type of hypergraphia. The difference in hypergraphia, the compulsion to write, and graphomania is that graphomania usually results in nonsense. People suffering from graphomania write about themselves, and the causes can be isolation, estrangement, insecurity, and the desire to appear sophisticated. You will see all of these in Johnny's mother's letters from the asylum. Johnny, at this point in the footnotes, describes a horrible supernatural event that he experiences at work at the tattoo parlor. Quote, "Everything falls apart, stories heard but not recalled, letters too, words filling my head, fragmenting like artillery shells, shrapnel like syllables, shrap, cracked, traveling at murderous speed, tearing through it all at a very, very bad, perhaps even irreparable way." We then learn about Karen's phobia of open, dark places, developed inexplicably in childhood, and we see in this incident at work that Johnny is developing it, perhaps from reading the Navidson Record, absorbing it from the pages themselves. Simultaneously in the record, Navidson has promised Karen that he will not enter the hallway that has appeared in their living room wall, the impossible door in their inside-exterior wall. And yet he does. Of course he does anyway. While Karen and the children are asleep, and he gets lost in his own home, and he hears growling. Growling. When he finally stumbles back into his living room from his terrifying ordeal, he finds his daughter Daisy. The record ends here with a shaken Will tucking Daisy into bed and turning to find Karen in the doorway, wanting to know what he's doing. Here, there is a footnote interjected by the editor, directing the reader to now read Appendix 2D, Johnny's father's obituary, and Appendix 2E, the letters written to Johnny by his mother from the institution, starting on page 584. So here we briefly leave the world of the house and enter the world of Johnny Truant and Pelafina Heather Livre. And it is just as terrifying and has just as many corridors. First, Johnny's father's obituary. There is an editor's note letting us know that, at Johnny's request, all identifying factors have been removed, including his father's first name and the actual day of his death. Pelafina, his mother, calls his father Donnie in her letters, but it is suggested that this has been changed as well. His father was a pilot who was grounded due to injury, so started driving trucks, and died in a Mack truck accident. Grounded flight like Icarus? Or am I so caught up in the mythology written into this novel that I'm writing my own footnotes now, like Johnny and Zappano? It's a scary thought. Then we go into Pelafina's letters. You can explore them in two different ways. You can read them as is in the appendix of the novel, or you can buy the standalone collection, The Whalestow Letters, which contains an introduction by the former information technologist from the Three Attic Whalestow Institute, who rescued them and compiled them, and which contains 11 extra letters of Pelafina's, which deepen the story. I've got that linked in the show notes. The Three Attic Whalestow Institute letters are dated from July 28, 1982 to May 3, 1989. Before we delve into them, let me show the timeline I've compiled for the story so far. I did so after being curious about the overlap between Pelafina's last letters and Johnny's finding the Navidson record, and when the family moved into the house, given some things Pelafina said in her letters. So here's my compiled timeline up to our point in the novel, including the extra information in the Whalestow Letters collection. 1720. Ash Tree Lane is quote-unquote supposedly built in this year, according to the realtor. 1981. Again, according to the realtor, a family wanted to build an L extension, then moved out because they wanted something much smaller. July 1981. Johnny's father dies in a truck accident. July 28, 1982. Johnny's mother's Pelafina, her first letter from Three Attic Whalestow Institute to Johnny, approximately 1 year after Johnny's father died. May 3, 1989, Pelafina's last letter to Johnny. May 4, 1989, Pelafina's suicide. May 5, 1989, the letter from Whalestow's director telling Johnny of Pelafina's death. September 1989, Johnny retrieved one piece of jewelry of Pelafina's from Whalestow's Institute. October 31, 1998, Johnny's introduction to the Navidson record. He found it in Zappano's apartment. April 1990, Will begins recording documentary videotapes of his family in his house, the beginning of his documentary project. June 1990, the date of the two Exploration VHS tapes, Exploration A and Exploration B. June 21st is Johnny's birthday. 1993, Miramax purchased the two Exploration videotapes and all of Navidson's documentary tapes, compiled them, and put them out as the documentary movie The Navidson Record. Same year, the Three Attic Whalestow Institute closed. August 6, 2000, the date of Walden D. Wyther's compilation of Pelafina's letters, with 11 extra letters included. Now to the letters. Johnny's mother is in the institute. I'm going to approach the letters the same way I'm approaching the novel. I'm leaving so many details for you to discover. However, there are some specific details I'm going to discuss for the purpose of exploration and intrigue. I'm explicitly leaving out why Pelafina was committed. I will only tell you that Johnny's father and her husband had her committed. She was involuntarily committed by her husband. I will leave those details of why to unfold for you. Another song from the Haunted album comes up repeatedly in Pelafina's letters. Spanish Doll, track 14. Pelafina refers often to saving a Spanish doll in an attic. Remember, the mental hospital's name is the Three Attic Whalestow Institute. Quote, "This place feels so unfamiliar, and yet I know it well. I think I used to belong here, but the only way I can tell is that I miss you still, and I cannot find you here. You left me tattered and torn, just like that Spanish doll. I went down to the alleyway, Sierra La Bonita, and found out you were gone. Spanish doll, si nunca te fueras, as if you'd never left. You left no word, no message. I still don't know what went wrong. Spanish doll, lagrima, tears. But now no matter where I go, I always seem to return. Spanish doll, busca me, find me, to where you left me tattered and torn. Spanish doll, yo so rompido mi musquina. I am torn, my sweet doll. It's like that sweet Spanish doll, a memory gilded in red and gold. Spanish doll, del oro, of gold also pain. Beauty guarded and never sold. Spanish doll, cuida me, protect me. I keep it with me wherever I go, and I love you still, no matter how a story will unfold. Spanish doll, recuerda me, remember me. You know I always will. I have part of you here in this souvenir. Sweet Spanish doll, stranger in this world without you, is all I can ever be. All I know that's pure and clear, you left it with me here, in this souvenir, this sweet Spanish doll." This part is spoken. I believe the voice is Mark and Annie Danilewski's father. We hear of a lovely daughter, shot down in her mistaken flight, unaware yet how her life will be affected by this experience. And then a girl says, "Why is it a house of leaves?" Pelafina's letters go from clear to delusional to clear again, but I use the term clarity loosely. She's obsessed with Johnny in a disturbing and emotionally incestual manner. He is her only love, and he is perfect in her overly effusive eyes. She's also completely impressed with herself. Remember what I said about graphomania? About how graphomaniacs desire to appear sophisticated? As I mentioned, Pelafina's letters are also pretentious, full of references to Greek mythology, Latin phrases, as well as Spanish and French phrases and even Old English, and allusions to relatively obscure book characters, and on and on. On the surface, the letters seem to be written by an extremely well-read intellectual. Read them deeply for context, and they're frenetic and pretentious and alarming. They made me really uncomfortable. Since there are no accents in this novel, her allusions must be examined. I'll do so more deeply later. On page 630 of the novel, Pelafina's letter refers back, as an echo of the past and the future, to the supernatural incident at Johnny's work that happens years later. Quote, "You did more than wet yourself." On page 631, Pelafina wrote a taunting, cruel letter to Johnny that explains why he's calling himself Johnny Truant. I explored the implications of this name in episode 68, Bone Chimes and Primitive Spiders. Pelafina may be an unreliable narrator for many reasons, but one more important thing to mention about Pelafina, she appears to have premonitions about the house. In her less lucid states, she speaks about rooms upon rooms, about corridors, as quoted at the beginning of this episode, and about becoming a tree. At her most erratic, her text takes the shape of hallways. Two themes that reappear in her letters, along with the Spanish doll, are water and trees, over and over. Having absorbed the madness, and now understanding why Johnny feels stuck in his life, as I discussed in episode 68, a tattooist assistant, filling up ink cartridges and sweeping up the shop, not dating anyone and with very few friends, we return to the meat of the Navidson record, and the echoes of lies and compromises, echoes in those very words, lies and compromises, compromises and lies. Navidson compromises by telling Karen they'll turn the investigation of the 5.5-minute hallway over to Billy Reston and then move. He lies by not telling Karen what happened. Always echoes hallways. And then in another echo, we learn that Karen is not only similar to Johnny, or Johnny is similar to Karen, developing her phobia, but Karen is also similar to Pelafina. Both became peculiar in childhood, beginning to practice their smiles in the mirror, which I find very eerie, and reminds me of the horror novel Elizabeth by Ken Greenhall, writing as Jessica Hamilton, which I highly recommend, and I've linked in the show notes, and I will link in the website entry for this episode. Both are oddly controlled in this manner and controlling. Both have an odd sense of self, both have a striking before and after in their lives, and both are living in fear. Section 6 begins with quotes about animals. Ernest Becker's quote about how animals live in a world without time, quote unquote, but rather with instincts and no knowledge of death. Christian Norberg Schultz's quote is about how man needs orientation to act, and animals do not. We learn that Hillary the dog is wary of people at the end of Navid's in the record. Mallory the tabby cat disappears with no reference from anyone in the family. In a dated moment on the tapes, August 11, 1990, 1 week after Navy got lost, we have footage of Hillary chasing Mallory into the 5.5-minute hallway, and then through the window, we see them both immediately appear in the backyard. The house's temporal and spatial existence is apparently different for animals. Seeing their names together struck me. I know those names. And then it hit me. Hillary and Mallory were both explorers. Everything is connected and nothing is an accident in the record. Sir Edmund Percival Hillary, 1919-2008, from New Zealand, was the first person to summit Mount Everest. George Herbert Lee Mallory, 1886-1924, British, was part of the first three-person expedition to Everest. And if you didn't know, explorers who die on Mount Everest are left where they die because it's unsafe to try to remove them, and then they are used as landmarks for future climbers. Orange Jacket, for example. Think back to Johnny's mother's quote with which I opened the episode. Hundreds of rooms full of indistinguishable remains. Echoes upon echoes of premonitions. Everything's connected. There's one more animal reference in this section, quote, Kilkenny disappear. I hunted this down and found that this is a reference to an old and creepy limerick, which refers back to Mallory's disappearance. There were 2 cats at Kilkenny. Each thought there was 1 cat too many. They fought and they hit, and they scratched and they bit, till, accepting their nails and the tips of their tails, instead of 2 cats there weren't any. This section ends with 2 luscious quotes. In the shadow of unspoken events, and in the glass of my memory, in the moonstream of my imagination. I adore the language of this novel. I'm in love. Obviously, I'm on the 4th episode of it. Section 7 begins with a quote from Jack London's Stibble to Fire, which is about a newcomer without imagination, an explorer completely out of his depth. And then we are introduced to the new hallway explorers. Holloway Roberts and his assistants arrive to the house on Hastry Lane. Holloway is described as looking like a conquistador. In my opinion, he's a professional Indiana Jones character. Navy told Billy all about Exploration A, told him he lied to Karen, and sent him the VHS tape of his getting lost. Billy Reston sent the tape to Holloway. Foreshadowing, if you remember the first episode, Bone Chimes and Primitive Spiders, Holloway crying is on the second tape that was passed around and made into the documentary by Miramax. Holloway is also assumed, we discovered now, to be the first person to copy the Exploration A VHS tape and pass it around to other people, starting the urban legend of the house. Holloway shows up at the house with 2 employees, Jed Roberts and Kirby Wax Hook. Jed was a truck driver like Johnny's father before he became an explorer. No coincidences. Wax is an expert mountain climber and cave spelunker. Relationships at this time continue to be an awkward dance. Navi and Karen are tense. We learn about Karen's past infidelities. Holloway and Navidson dislike each other immediately. Wax is extremely extroverted and comes in hot and hyper. Children are acting out. Then in the footnotes, we learn about Johnny's infatuation, whom he calls Thumper for her bunny tattoo. Familial tension, sexual tension, all the way around. And the professional explorations into the 5.5-minute hallway begin. We'll go into that hallway with them and explore all the pins I've placed, such as Pisces, more about Pelafina's letters and how they fit in now, including those Old English passages that Reddit helped me translate, and I'll go deeper into Haunted's lyrics and their significance. 5 songs fit directly into these sections, later this week, as I begin celebrating the 5th anniversary of the podcast. Thank you for listening these 5 years. Thank you for understanding how my health has interfered with it so often. Thank you for sharing, joining the Patreon, joining the new Substack, communicating on social media, buying books through Audible and my links on the website, and leaving reviews. Thanks to my podcast review service, I know that my average rating across all podcatchers, such as Spotify, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, and CastBox, 4.9 out of 5. I can't ask for more than that. I'm overwhelmed and humbled by that. I love all of you. Thank you for letting me talk about books and history and language and the weird and fun connections my odd brain makes for all these years, finding cupcakes for all of us. So I leave you hanging for a couple of days with 2 tense children, 3 explorers, a UVA engineer, an emotionally unavailable and frightened wife, and a documentary maker husband with his camera running, all standing in front of an open door and a completely dark hallway that should not be. Last time I left you with a scream. This time, I leave you with tension and mountaineering equipment in a suburban living room, cartoons on the television and carabiners and glow sticks on the carpet, and a beckoning doorway of darkness.